I need to check the used names file and then write the story. The used names are Walter Henley, Diane, Mackenzie, Carol, Calvin Mercer, Rebecca, Brent Howes, Tom, Trevor, Becca, Lorraine, Bert Hollister, Nathan, Eleanor, Dennis Yarrow, Gerald Pittman, Marcus, Sandra, Joy, Raymond, Patricia, Sylvia, Philip, Jean Hartwell, Todd, Adrian, Renee, Frank Hargrove, Vincent, Arthur, Margaret, Edwin Caulfield, Claire, Owen, Rosalind, Warren Hutchins, Nora, Cody, Stewart. New names I'll use: Harold, narrator, 64, Lily, granddaughter, 8, Darlene, Dorler, 8, Darlene, daughter, Kurt, son-in-law, Sandy, neighbor, Judge Whitmore. I need to set my coffee down before I tell you this, because even now, 2 years later, my hands still shake a little when I think about it. It was a Thursday afternoon in late June when my daughter called. I was out back trying to fix the sprinkler head on the left side of the yard, the one that had been spraying sideways into the fence since April. When my phone buzzed in my shirt pocket, I saw her name on the screen and answered without thinking twice, the way you always do when it's your kid calling. She said she needed a favor. Her voice had that tight quality to it, the one I recognized from when she was 17 and had wrecked my car and needed to tell me about it. Controlled, careful. She and Kurt were having some kind of conflict. She didn't get into specifics, and she needed to go stay with her friend Sandy in Phoenix for a few days to clear her head. Could I take Lily for the week? Just until she got herself sorted out. I told her, of course. Lily was 8 years old, and she was my whole heart. I would have rearranged anything for that little girl. What I didn't ask, and what I've thought about 1,000 times since, is why Kurt wasn't the one watching her. My daughter dropped Lily off the next morning. She hugged her daughter for a long time in the driveway, longer than you'd expect for a week's separation, and then she got in her car without coming inside. I thought that was a little strange. Darlene usually came in for coffee. We'd sit at the kitchen table and talk for an hour, but I told myself she was probably just in a hurry to get on the road before the Phoenix traffic got bad. Lily stood at the end of the driveway and watched her mother's car until it turned the corner. She had a small pink backpack over one shoulder and she was wearing a yellow sundress, and she didn't wave goodbye. She just watched. I called her name and she turned around and gave me a smile. It was a real smile. But there was something behind her eyes that I couldn't name right away, something that looked like relief. I made pancakes for breakfast. Blueberry, her favorite, I'd remembered from her last visit, and bought a fresh pint specifically. I put the plate in front of her and poured the syrup and stepped back to get my own coffee. And when I turned around, she hadn't touched them. She was just sitting there with her hands flat on the table looking at the plate. I said, "Lily, eat up, sweetheart. They're going to get cold." She looked up at me. Then she said, very quietly, "Am I allowed to eat all of them?" I didn't understand the question at first. I thought maybe she meant something about sugar, or maybe Darlene had her on some kind of diet. Kids pick up strange ideas sometimes. So I said, "Sure, eat as many as you want. That's what they're there for." She picked up her fork slowly, like she was waiting for me to change my mind. She ate all 4 pancakes, then looked at the serving plate and looked at me. I said, "You still hungry?" She nodded, just barely. I made her 2 more. She ate those too. And when she was done, she sat back and let out this long, slow breath, like she'd been holding it for a long time, like something had finally been allowed to release. I sat down across from her. I said, "Lily, can I ask you something?" She said yes. I said, "Who decides whether you're allowed to eat at home?" The question just came out. I don't know exactly why I phrased it that way, but I watched her face change when I said it. The relief that had been sitting there folded back into something more careful, more guarded. She said, "Daddy has a chart." I said, "What kind of chart?" She said it was a chart on the refrigerator. She got check marks for good behavior. You needed check marks to earn meals. If you didn't have enough check marks by dinner time, you didn't eat dinner. She said this the way you described the rules of a board game. Matter of fact. Like it was just how things worked. I had to put my coffee mug down because I was gripping it too hard. I said, "And what happens if you lose check marks?" She said, "You go to the room." I asked her what was in the room. She said, "Nothing. That's why it's called the room." I kept my voice steady. I'd spent 31 years as a high school history teacher, and I knew how to keep my voice steady when I needed to. But inside, I was doing something that didn't have a clean name. It was anger, but it was also fear. And underneath both of those was a kind of grief that I wasn't prepared for. Over the next 2 days, things came out slowly. Not because I was interrogating her, I wasn't, I was careful not to push. But Lily was 8 years old, and she'd been carrying things that were too heavy for an 8-year-old. And once she understood she was in a safe place, she started to put them down. The checkmark chart had been in place since the previous fall, about 8 months earlier. Kurt had started it, he said, because Lily wasn't disciplined enough. The rules shifted constantly. What earned a checkmark one day might not count the next. She learned not to ask for food directly, because asking could cost her check marks for being demanding. On school mornings, she was usually allowed breakfast because Kurt didn't want teachers asking questions. But on weekends and summers, it was the chart. She'd lost 7 pounds since her last checkup, according to what Darlene had mentioned to me in passing months ago, in a way that suggested she thought maybe Lily was just going through a growth phase. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. I was thinking about it now. On the third morning, I helped her change into a swimsuit to use the little inflatable pool I'd set up in the backyard. And that's when I saw the bruise on her upper arm. It was faded, greenish yellow at the edges, which meant it was at least a week old. About 3 inches across. I asked her what happened. She said she'd fallen. I said, "Can you show me how you fell? Where were you?" She looked at the ground for a moment. Then she said, "I dropped a glass on the kitchen floor and Daddy got upset." She said it so quietly I almost didn't hear the last part. I called my son that night after Lily was asleep. His name is Dale, and he lives in Denver, and he is the most level-headed person I know. I told him everything, and he listened without interrupting. When I was done, there was a long pause on the line. He said, "Dad, you need to call CPS tomorrow morning." I said I knew that. I just needed to hear someone say it out loud. I also called my doctor, who confirmed what I already suspected. Withholding food as punishment is classified as neglect under Arizona state law. The bruising, depending on how it was caused, could constitute physical abuse. She told me to document everything, write down dates, quotes, anything Lily had said, and to call Child Protective Services first thing in the morning. I wrote for 2 hours that night. Filled 6 pages in a legal pad. Dates, details, Lily's exact words as best as I could remember them. I wrote down the name of the chart. I wrote down the phrase, "the room." I wrote down 7 pounds. The CPS caseworker who came to the house was a woman named Ms. Rourke. She was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, and she was very calm and professional. She spoke with Lily privately in the living room for about 45 minutes, while I sat in the kitchen and stared at the wall. When she came out, she had a look on her face that I recognized from my years in education. It was the look that adults get when a child has said something that confirms their worst suspicions. She told me not to send Lily back. She said she was filing for an emergency protective hold, and that the case would go before a family court judge within 72 hours. She told me to retain an attorney if I wanted to pursue temporary guardianship. I called a family law attorney that afternoon. Her name was Miss Calloway, and she had 20 years of experience in exactly this kind of case. I told her I wanted to do this right. Kurt called me that evening. My daughter had apparently told him what was happening, and he was furious. He started in immediately. I was overreacting. Lily had a tendency to exaggerate. The bruise was from soccer practice. The chart was just a structured behavior system that his therapist had actually recommended. He talked fast, which is what people do when they're trying to cover a lot of distance quickly. I let him finish. Then I said, "Kurt, I have 6 pages of documentation and a CPS caseworker who has already filed a report. I think you should call a lawyer." He hung up. Darlene called an hour later. That conversation was harder. She was crying and she kept saying she hadn't known it was that bad. She hadn't realized she thought the chart was just a phase and that Kurt would stop on his own. She said she'd been afraid to push back because when she pushed back, things got worse. She said she was sorry. She said it a lot of times. I believed her. I also knew that belief and accountability were 2 different things, and that Lily needed more than apologies. The family court hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in July. I drove myself there in my old Subaru, which has 140,000 miles on it, and a crack in the dashboard that I keep meaning to fix. My attorney met me outside. We sat in a wood-paneled room that smelled like carpet cleaner and waited for the judge. The judge's name was Judge Hartley. He was a quiet man in his 60s, and he had the kind of face that has learned to hear difficult things without showing too much. He reviewed Ms. Rourke's report. He reviewed my documentation. He looked at a school attendance record that my attorney had subpoenaed, which showed that Lily had been sent to the school nurse 4 times in the previous semester for complaints of dizziness and stomach pain. He asked to speak with Lily privately through a child advocate. 40 minutes later, he came back. He granted me temporary guardianship, effective immediately. He ordered Kurt to have no contact with Lily pending a full investigation. He ordered a mandatory psychological evaluation for Kurt, and a separate evaluation for Darlene. He noted in his ruling that the school had flagged Lily's visits to the nurse and had failed to file a mandatory report, and he referred that matter separately. He looked over his glasses at Kurt's attorney and said in the driest possible tone that the court did not consider a checkmark chart an appropriate substitute for feeding a child. Kurt did not look at me when we left the courthouse. The weeks that followed were complicated in the way that healing is always complicated. Not linear, not clean, full of days that felt like progress, and days that felt like standing still. Lily stayed with me through the rest of the summer. We established routines. I made breakfast every morning, always more than she could eat, so she would understand that the food was always there. She stopped asking for permission to eat within about 2 weeks. That felt like a milestone. She started seeing a child therapist named Dr. Patel, who specialized in childhood trauma. Dr. Patel told me in our first parent consultation that Lily was resilient, which I already knew, but that resilience didn't mean she wouldn't need time and space to process what had happened. We shouldn't rush it. We should follow her lead. I followed her lead. When she wanted to talk, we talked. When she wanted to watch movies and eat popcorn and not talk about anything serious, we did that too. She discovered that I had a box of old baseball cards in the garage, and for about 3 weeks that was her whole world. She organized them by team, then by year, then by her own personal rating system that she invented, which involved some criteria I never fully understood, but that she explained at great length. I listened to all of it. Dale flew in from Denver in August and spent 2 weeks with us, watching him and Lily together. Watching her laugh the way kids are supposed to laugh, loose and unguarded, was something I will keep with me for the rest of my life. The formal custody process took about 5 months. There were evaluations, hearings, a guardian ad litem assigned to represent Lily's interests specifically. Kurt's psychological evaluation revealed what his attorney had not been eager to discuss. He had significant unresolved issues stemming from his own childhood, which had not been a gentle one. That didn't excuse anything, but it explained the pattern in a way that the court found relevant. In the end, Kurt was granted no contact with Lily for a period of 2 years, after which reunification therapy could be explored, if Lily consented and her therapist agreed. He was ordered to complete a mandatory parenting course and to continue individual therapy as a condition of any future contact. He was also ordered to pay child support, which his attorney objected to strenuously, and which the judge granted anyway. Darlene was granted supervised visitation, 2 hours per week, at a family resource center with a social worker present. She showed up for every single appointment. I'll give her that. The school district settled a separate matter related to the mandatory reporting failure. I won't say more about that, except that the following school year, they brought in an outside firm to retrain every teacher and staff member on their legal obligations. That was the outcome I cared about. Not money. Outcomes. Last September, Lily started 3rd grade. She made 2 best friends within the first month. She joined the school's art club and came home one afternoon with a watercolor painting of what she said was our backyard, though it looked more like an abstract sunset, which I told her was actually better. I hung it on the refrigerator, not where a chart used to be, just on the refrigerator. 'Cause that's where you put things that matter. She's doing well. I want to be careful not to wrap this up too neatly, because her story isn't finished. No one's is. And there will be harder days ahead and questions she'll have to work through that I can't answer for her. But she laughs easily now. She sleeps through the night. She asks for seconds at dinner without hesitating. And sometimes she asks me to make pancakes even when it's not morning. And I always say yes. I'm 64 years old. I retired 3 years ago after 3 decades of teaching other people's children. I thought I was done with the big things, the things that required everything you had. I wasn't done. I'll tell you what I know now that I didn't fully understand before. Love is not passive. It is not enough to feel it. You have to act on it. Even when acting is uncomfortable, even when it costs you relationships and sleep and money and the version of your life you thought you were going to have. You have to walk into the courthouse with your legal pad and your 6 pages of notes and sit in that wood-paneled room and say, out loud in front of everyone, this child deserves better. She did deserve better. She does. And the pancakes are always blueberry. That part hasn't changed. I've been sitting with this story for 2 years now, and I still don't have a clean way to end it. Life doesn't give you clean endings. It gives you Tuesday mornings, and an 8-year-old asking if she's allowed to finish her pancakes, and you have to decide right then and there what kind of person you are. What I've come to believe, not from any book or sermon, but from living 64 years and watching how things actually play out, is that the choices people make accumulate. They stack up, one on top of another, until the weight of them becomes the life you're living. Kurt made choices, small ones at first probably, that compounded over months into something that left a child afraid to pick up a fork without permission. That didn't happen in a single moment. It built, and when things build like that, they eventually fall, and they take everyone nearby down with them. That's not punishment from some outside force. That's just physics. Cause and effect, playing out the way it always does. What I also know is that doing the right thing is almost never convenient. When I filed that CPS report, I knew it would shatter whatever was left of my relationship with Kurt. I knew it would complicate things with Darlene in ways that might take years to repair. I knew there would be attorneys and hearings and long drives to a courthouse in July heat, and money I hadn't planned to spend. I did it anyway because Lily was sitting in my guest room, not knowing if she was allowed to be hungry. Moral courage, and I'm going to call it that plainly, is not about being unafraid. I was afraid the whole time. I was afraid I was wrong, afraid I was overstepping, afraid of what it would cost. Courage is just what it looks like when you act despite that fear, because something matters more than your own comfort. The intelligence part came in being methodical, writing things down, calling my son, calling a doctor, calling an attorney, not acting on pure emotion, even though the emotion was there and it was loud. There's a version of this story where I confronted Kurt directly and made everything worse. I chose documentation over confrontation, process over impulse, and I think that's the reason the outcome was what it was, and the resilience. That belongs to Lily, not to me. I just created the conditions. She did the actual work of deciding, somewhere deep inside herself, that the world was still worth trusting. Kids who've been through what she went through don't just bounce back because someone makes them blueberry pancakes. They rebuild, slowly and on their own terms, if the people around them are patient enough to wait. I think about Darlene too. I think about the version of her that knew something was wrong and stayed quiet because staying quiet felt safer than the alternative. I don't say that to condemn her. Fear is a powerful thing and it makes people smaller than they want to be. But I hope she understands now, after everything, that silence has consequences just as real as action does. What we fail to do matters as much as what we do. The watercolor painting Lily made is still on my refrigerator. It's still more abstract sunset than backyard, and it's still the best thing on that door. I'm 64 years old, and I thought the big chapters were behind me. Turns out the most important thing I ever did happened in retirement, in a kitchen in Arizona on a Thursday morning in June, when a little girl asked me if she was allowed to eat. The answer was yes. It will always be yes.